Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here to open up a whole new line of teaching. I trust that this venue and this podcast has been helpful and enlightening and informative in terms of your process, whether it be religious, cultural, social, economic. We cover a variety of topics in this venue, and particularly designed for people of faith. Particularly, we like to address topics that are hot buttons in our community. Particularly, we like to talk about things that nobody else wants to talk about. We try to get outside the mainstream and try to get to the root of the matter, the radix. And sometimes getting to the radix, we find ourselves being a little radical, because radix and radical do kind of go together. But in order to get the best insight and the best method to apply, we gotta ask the right questions. And that's been our challenge. We don't ask questions. We don't critically think. We just respond, react, do things where we always been done, accept what we always accepted. Even though in the back of your mind, there's questions that you've always had and just did not have, didn't even think about trying to address it, because life is just moving along like that. And to address that question requires work. Well, one of the things that I've tried to do with Talking Points is to do some of the work for you. Draw upon scholarship, draw upon experience, draw upon stories that help us to see things differently, to begin to reflect and begin to ask the kinds of questions that are crucial for our spiritual and personal development. Well, today, particularly for people of faith, I want to talk about this particular topic, and it's entitled Faith in Conflict. And so in this series, we're going to be looking at some powerful subtleties that influence American Christians. So this is part one that we're going to deal with today. And yes, there's stuff that does influence how we think, how we behave, how we respond as particularly American Christians. So kind of walk with me through this. I'm going to take my time with this because we have a lot of things to cover in the upcoming weeks. So just kind of walk with me and be prayerful about some of the things that you're going to hear. Here's a quote from Juan Eleazar, who is a Harvard staff writer, and this is what he wrote in the Harvard Gazette in January 7th, 2019. And it was in the article he wrote about slavery alongside Christianity. Here's his quote. In the modern era, Christianity and slavery are seen as oxymoronic. But for much of Christian history, many saw no conflict between keeping the faith and keeping or trading slaves. From the first century until the Civil War, the Bible itself was often used to justify slavery. Well, what American Christians didn't know about their faith, what American Christians didn't know about their faith. Like all other religions, culture and social ideology influence American Christianity. There is a belief that all Christians should see things through the same lens, which is invalid. And I say that because there is an assumption that if I'm a Christian, that I'm supposed to agree with this and agree with that, that I'm supposed to see this and see it a particular way. But let me say, all Christians do not see things the same way, yet they're all Christ followers, yet they don't all share the same lens. The scripture implies that we should be in the world and not of it. Obviously, I'm quoting or drawing from the Gospel of John, chapter 17, where he prayed for his disciples that they would be kept from the world that they were in, that they would be in it, but not of it. We get implications that there's something different about us as Christ followers, that we should be beacons of light in a world that is so dark. That we ought to be different, but no matter where we are as believers, and I'm going to say this very clearly, where I'm a believer in the South, or I'm a believer in the North or the Midwest, or I'm a believer in one of the Pacific Islands, or in Europe, or in Russia, or some other nation, culture, or ethnicity, wherever Christians reside, we're going to be influenced by the culture and social ideology. Just because you're a Christian in one country doesn't mean that Christians in another country believe and feel the same way you do. Culture and ideology influences all Christians wherever they're at. So, how is this possible when the world around us has influenced how we see and relate to each other, and how we see and relate to those outside our worldview? The practice should be for all believers everywhere is to engage in what's called cultural empathy or cultural compassion. Try to learn how the other person feels, why they feel the way they do first, rather than be quick to judge them for what comes out of their mouth. We need to be informed what shaped their concept or what shaped their worldview. And if Christians will begin to engage in that kind of open dialogue, we're not going to snap judge on someone else because they believe something or behave differently. Culture and social ideology does influence how we believe and how we feel as Christians. If I grow up in the South and I was exposed to a certain environment, I'm going to take that perception wherever I go. And I may get to a place to where I may find other Christians that believe a little differently. Give you an example. Now, I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, Midwestern reality and part of the Bible Belt. There were just certain things that, from a religious standpoint, that was the acceptable norm for people that go to church or engage in any kind of a Judeo-Christian church-related activity. You dress up on Sunday morning. That's one of the things you did. You put a suit and tie on, and you head out to the place of meeting. When I came out here, where I currently live in Arizona. When I came out here, it was a shock for me to see people come to church with flip-flops on. They love the Lord, but they got on flip-flops, short pants, tank tops, and so on and so forth. Well, the heat, for one thing, I come to understand, is very dynamic, and so people do dress appropriately. On the other hand, it took me a moment to begin to embrace the idea of seeing pastors with blue jeans on Sunday morning and their shirt hanging out. Love the Lord, but the way they were brought up in this region was quite different than what I'm used to experiencing in the Bible Belt or the Midwest. So in my mind, there was a clash of cultures. And so that's how culture and social ideology influence us. Something around us is shaping how we respond, shaping how we see others that don't believe like us or others that do not share the same worldview. That's just an example. Let's move a little further. What American Christians didn't know about their faith. Here, Christianity is not a one-size-fits-all, but a conglomeration of people from different cultures and social ideologies. Sometimes this can even conflict between one set of scriptures who believe and behave differently and those who do not see things the same way. The fact is, this is very true in America, and I just gave you my personal experience with that. Historically, we have had some social atrocities by people who believe in Jesus, carry the Bible, worshiped at the place of meeting, and then use the same Bible to oppress and enslave other people who do not look like them. Now, we don't need a history lesson on slavery in America, but we need to know color was one thing and profit was another. However, two things are essential. The basis of slavery was about profit, and the color of those enslaved people required a theology or ideology to justify those atrocities and to keep them in their place. This is a fact. But what makes it so oxymoronic is that these people that share these kind of views, that impose this kind of oppression and enslavement, believe in Jesus, carry the Bible, worship at the place of meeting, sang songs that glorify God, etc. And at the same time, they will pick scriptures out to try to say that slaves need to obey their masters. They'll pick scriptures out that would draw from the Old Testament to show that God honored, that God permitted slavery. The idea is that makes it so oxymoronic is that the enslaved and oppressed and the enslaver and the oppressor believe in Jesus, carry a Bible, and worship at the place of meeting. The initial point that I made is that color was one thing and profit was another. Now, yes, we know that blacks were the 400 years of slaves here in America. We all understand that. That's a historical fact. Whether there are initiatives out there or not that's trying to take that truth out of the schools. No matter what the truth was, how bad it was, it should be included so we have a well-rounded view and not some sanitized understanding that makes certain people whose ancestors were the oppressors and enslavers comfortable. You know, if I'm a descendant of the oppressor and the enslavers, then I don't want to hear those kind of things that my ancestors did. However, To have a well-rounded view is to have a knowledge of the truth. And if I was to borrow the words of Jesus, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So if I don't have a well-rounded view, I'm not going to have the whole truth. And the whole truth that I'm trying to sanitize becomes a lie. In other words, the version I give out is sanitized. What I'm doing is I'm giving out a palatable lie. All right, I'm going to get off my bandwagon for a moment. But all of these things that I'm saying here are part and parcel of what we are confronted with as American Christians. And these are things we don't know about our faith. The basis of slavery was about profit. I'll say it again. The basis of slavery was about profit. And the color of those people required a theology or ideology to justify those atrocities and keep them in their place. The whole Civil War was not about whether, it was morally wrong to enslave another human being. It was about profit. And imagine the profit that this country has entailed during that era of 400 years of tax-free dollars. Don't let me get on my bandwagon back again. But I want us to keep in mind that the oppressed and the oppressor believe in Jesus, carry the Bible, and worship at the place of meeting. Let's go a little bit further. However, some slaveholders and pro-slavery apologists used selective biblical verses such as those referencing slavery in the Old Testament, and I kind of alluded toward that. They did this to argue that God sanctioned or permitted slavery. Obviously, there are words of Paul that have been extracted from those epistles where slaves obeyed their masters and so on and so forth. Well, if I'm an enslaved person and I believe in Jesus and I hear that, then that says I need to obey my oppressors. I need to keep my mouth shut and stay in my place. There are people who are pro-slavery apologists that claim that the enslavement of Africans was part of God's divine plan, and that it was a means to bring Christianity to Africans, thereby offering them a path to salvation. That is one of the most misinformed conception and perceptions about Christianity and about Africans. And this is what we're going to get into, and I'm going to introduce part of it in this first segment, and I'll go into more depth in part 2. This line of thinking, that is, this was part of God's divine plan to bring salvation to Africans. This line of thinking attempted to what? Justify enslaved people's brutal and inhumane treatment. The truth is, Christianity existed for centuries in Africa and among African people long before Europeans enslaved them. What I'm telling you here is documented facts, documented scholarship, documented archaeological evidence, documented truth. But if I'm only told the truth that I want you to know, I can guide and I can shape the narrative to benefit who? The one that is disseminating the information. So these are the kind of things that have been coming out. That Christianity existed in Africa and among African people long before Europeans enslaved them. Just because they didn't speak English and read scripture from the King James Version doesn't mean they didn't know Jesus in their own language. Yes, the truth is Christianity has a long history in Africa that predates the era of transatlantic slavery. The origins of Christianity in Africa can be traced back to the early centuries of the Common Era. And here are some of the key points about the early history of Christianity in Africa. And I'm going to go into more depth in this in the next episode. But to scratch the surface, to skim a little bit off the top, to get you to see where more research needs to be done for my own personal, and I'm saying this generally, for our own personal insight, so that I can be better informed as a Christian, whether I am melanized or not. I need to know that Africa was a seedbed of what? Western Christianity. So, how far can we trace these origins back? Africa can be traced back to the early centuries of the Common Era. Let's look at some of these truths. Early Christian communities. Christianity began to spread to Africa soon after the death of Jesus Christ. In fact, it went to Africa first before it went to Europe. We're going to talk about that. The New Testament mentions the Ethiopian eunuch who was baptized by the Apostle Philip. And that is in Acts chapter 8, 26 through 39. That's there, where you find Philip, who was an Ethiopian eunuch. He was a follower of Judaism. Oh, what does that suggest? What does that tell you? That this Ethiopian eunuch was a Torah observant Jew because he was sitting there reading the book of Isaiah. So that means, where did he get this information from? He brought it from his homeland there in Ethiopia, because that's where he was from. And so just common sense would tell you he got information about the Hebrew scriptures and the Hebrew faith from his homeland. So Ethiopia at one time was had a Torah observant presence. And this Ethiopian eunuch was sitting there reading the book of Isaiah, which when Philip drew near to that chariot, he began to expound the person in the passage was in fact Jesus Christ. And then he asked, can I be baptized too? And he was baptized. Common sense will help us really is the entryway into appreciating the truth in the context that we're referring to today, which is Christianity, or Western Christianity. Its seedbed was Africa. Now, this encounter with Philip is considered one of the earliest instances the New Testament records. And I say that the New Testament records of Christianity reaching the African continent. So often we just deflect right to Paul without paying regards or giving regards to the dates and times that the message of Paul, how did the message of Paul, when it got to the Gentile nations, it had already gone to Europe, because Paul came later. And this is right after the death of Jesus Christ. Many of them had gone and had dispersed because of those kind of things. So there's more going to go into it the next time, but I'm going to scratch the surface today, and hopefully I can get some dialogue and some commentary back in the comment section so I can further elaborate. Here's another example of Christianity having its origins in Africa. North African Christianity. In the first few centuries of Christianity, North Africa became an important center of Christian thought and scholarship. Prominent early Christian figures like Tertullian and Augustine of Hippo, who are both African, they hailed from this region. These were prominent Christian figures. Tertullian and Augustine of Hippo were African, all right? They helped shape the Western Christian viewpoint as regards to theology. All right, a little bit more. Here's another person. Alexandria as a Christian center. The city of Alexandria, located in present-day Egypt, emerged as a significant center for Christian theology and education. It was a catechetical school of Alexandria. That word catechetical comes from the word we use in the Catholic tradition as catechism. This school of Alexandria played a crucial role in Christian intellectual development. All right? Kingdom of Axum. In the ancient kingdom of Axum, located in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, Christianity was officially adopted in the 4th century CE, or Common Era. The Axumite king Ezana is credited with establishing Christianity as a state religion. Christian monasticism. African monasticism was also influential in the development of early Christianity, such as, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, the Desert Fathers and the Mothers of Egypt. Oh, and by the way, Egypt is part of the continent of Africa. Let me say that again. Egypt is part of the continent of Africa. So the Desert Fathers and the Mothers of Egypt, known for their aesthetic practices and spiritual teaching, had a profound impact on Christian spirituality. Well, the bottom line is what Americans needed to learn about their faith is that Africa significantly contributed to its theological development. Well, again, I just scratched the surface today. Join us next time as we explore deeper into the African contribution of Christianity, and you'll be surprised at what you're about to find out. I trust that you've been informed by talking points. Join me next time as we delve further into faith in conflict, what American Christians didn't know about their faith. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time.